We live in interesting times.
For the headlines.
The pilot of a Russian passenger plane that erupted in a ball of fire on the runway of Moscow's busiest airport, killing 41 people, said lightning led to the emergency landing.
Humanity is rapidly destroying the natural world upon which our prosperity and ultimately our survival depends, according to a landmark UN assessment of the state of nature that reports 1 million species at risk of extinction.
Palestinian leaders in Gaza agree to a ceasefire with Israel to end a deadly two-day escalation in violence that threatened to widen into a fourth war between them since 2008.
China says it still plans to send negotiators to the United States for trade talks even after President Donald Trump vowed to raise tariffs later this week, a threat that sent stock markets into a tailspin.
I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.
We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Cepeda.
And now to the news. At least 41 people are believed to have died after a Russian passenger plane made an emergency landing at Moscow's busiest airport and caught fire. Dramatic footage that went viral on social media showed Aeroflot Sukhoi Superjet 100 aircraft crash landing and then speeding along the runway at Sheremetyevo International Airport on Sunday, flames pouring from its fuselage. Passengers could be seen leaping onto an inflatable slide at the front and running from the blazing plane as huge black columns of smoke billowed into the sky. Now, Russian media said 2 children and a flight attendant were among the dead. One witness said it was a miracle anyone escaped the jet, which was carrying 73 passengers and 5 crew. The jet carrying the 73 passengers and 5 crew members left Sheremetyevo at 6:02 p.m. local time, and the crew issued a distress signal shortly afterwards. Aeroflot, Russia's flagship carrier, said the plane had to return to the airport due to a technical reason, and its engines caught fire upon landing. Previous reports had said the fire broke out in mid-air. Now, the jet reportedly managed to land on its second attempt, hitting the ground with its landing gear first and then its nose. Flight tracking site Flight Radar 24 showed the jet looping once in the air before landing. The plane's fuel tanks were full, and a much bigger death toll could have been a real possibility, according to aviation experts. Investigators said they were looking into various lines of inquiry, and it was premature to draw any conclusions about the cause of the accident. Russian President Vladimir Putin offered his condolences to the victims' loved ones and said the investigation should be as thorough as possible, according to the Kremlin.
A top transportation safety official said a feature that helps aircraft slow down on landing was broken on a Boeing 737 that skidded into a river in Florida Sunday. The plane, carrying 143 people, slid off the runway after a hard landing Saturday at a naval air station in Jacksonville during a lightning storm. Police said 21 people were taken to hospital with minor injuries, but no fatalities or critical injuries were reported.
22 passengers, 22 people sought medical attention. Only one person was hospitalized. It was a dependent, 3-month-old child. The child was admitted to the hospital as a precaution for observation overnight, and last I checked this afternoon, the child was to be released.
Transport safety officials said one of the thrust reversers, which are supposed to help to slow the aircraft down, was not working. Bruce Landsberg, Vice Chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, said the aircraft had been in maintenance and the maintenance log noted that the left-hand thrust reverser was inoperative. Landsberg said the pilot also requested a change of runway. Landing on one air traffic control advised had naval equipment on it, reducing the available runway length by 1,200 feet. He said, "We don't know what they were thinking or why they made that choice. That will be one of the things we look to find out as we go through the cockpit voice recorder."
We are going to be very careful in preserving the perishable evidence because it doesn't make any sense to tear the aircraft apart and lose what we refer to as perishable data.
Thunderstorms and lightnings have been hampering efforts to retrieve the plane fuselage. The plane involved was a Boeing 737-800 in operation for 18 years, according to the Flight Radar 24 website. U.S. aerospace giant Boeing is under scrutiny following two crashes that killed a total of 346 passengers and crew and grounded its newer 737 MAX planes worldwide. Both a Lion Air crash in Indonesia in October and March Ethiopian Airlines crash outside Addis Ababa occurred shortly after takeoff.
To other news now, U.S. President Donald Trump announced that the United States will raise tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese goods. A blunt warning to Beijing just days before what is being billed as a last-ditch round of talks to reach a deal or resume their trade war. Now, to press China even more to accept U.S. demands, Trump also threatened again to impose tariffs on all Chinese imports to the U.S. worth $539.5 billion last year. Trump said he's raising some tariffs because the trade talks are going too slowly. For 10 months, China has been paying tariffs to the U.S. of 25% on $50 billion of high-tech and 10% on $200 billion of other goods. Trump tweeted, "The 10% will go up to 25% on Friday." Now, Trump says he wants to reduce the huge U.S. trade deficit with China, which in 2018 totaled $378.73 billion, with services trade included. Besides a greater opening of the Chinese market to U.S. goods, Trump is pressing for structural changes, such as Beijing ending its practice of forcing U.S. companies that operate in China to share their technology. Trump is also demanding that China halt intellectual property theft and subsidies to state-owned companies. The U.S. president has insisted throughout the process that he will not accept a watered-down trade accord. The Trump administration says it has seen promises and commitments ignored in the past. So this time, it'll not sign a deal unless it features measures that will allow Washington to verify that China is keeping its word. China is now considering canceling the next round of talks, scheduled to start Wednesday in Washington, according to the Wall Street Journal, citing a person briefed on the matter. It said China shouldn't negotiate with a gun pointed to its head. The newspaper quoted the source as saying, adding that a final decision had not been made. China's lead negotiator, Vice Premier Liu He, and his people are expected to arrive in Washington on Wednesday if the talks go ahead. So far, the Chinese side in the talks has agreed for China to buy more U.S. products, mainly in the farm and energy sectors. But one major obstacle to reaching a final deal continues to be a mechanism for enforcing any accord that is agreed upon. Beijing is pressing for the U.S. to lift the tariffs it has imposed, which Washington is evidently not willing to do. Trump's chief negotiator, Robert Lighthizer, told the Senate Finance Committee in March that America must keep open the options of raising tariffs on Chinese imports as a way to be sure China complies with the trade deal the two sides are working to complete.
China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says a Chinese trade team is still preparing to head to Washington for negotiations despite President Donald Trump's threat to raise tariffs later this week.
我这里可以告诉你的是，中方团队 正在准备赴美磋商。至于中美经贸磋商，大家都知道已经进行了10轮，取得了积极进展。我想当务之急，我们还是希望美方能够同中方共同努力，相向而行，争取在相互尊重的基础上，达成一个互利双赢的协议。这不仅
Said positive progress has been made in 10 rounds of high-level negotiations and that the whole world was watching. The Wall Street Journal had earlier reported that China was considering canceling the talks. Trump says that he wants to reduce the huge U.S. trade deficit with China, which in 2018 totaled $378.73 billion, with services trade included. Besides a greater opening for the Chinese market to U.S. goods, Trump is pressing for structural changes, such as Beijing ending its alleged practice of forcing U.S. companies that operate in China to share their technology. Trump is also demanding that China halt intellectual property theft and subsidies to state-owned companies.
Meanwhile, China said 2 U.S. warships sailed near the disputed islands in the South China Sea without permission on Monday in the latest U.S. challenge to Beijing's territorial claims in the region. The Chinese Navy asked the U.S. vessels to leave after they entered waters adjacent to Gavin and Chigua reefs in the Spratly Islands, which Beijing calls Nansha, according to the Foreign Ministry. The move comes on top of trade tensions, as President Trump said he would raise tariffs on $200 billion in Chinese goods on Friday because talks were moving too slowly.
在这种情况下，中方敦促美方停止此类挑衅行为，尊重中国的主权和安全利益，尊重地区国家维护南海和平稳定的努力。同时，中方也将继续采取一切必要的措施，捍卫国家主权安全，维护南海的和平稳定。
Now, he also said the situation in the sea was constantly stabilizing due to the joint efforts of Beijing and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. The U.S. Navy regularly conducts freedom of navigation operations to challenge Beijing's vast claims in the sea. Beijing has built artificial islands and military installations in the sea, including on the Spratlys. And China claims nearly all of the sea, though Taiwan, the Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam all claim parts of it.
The death toll from a cyclone that battered India and Bangladesh rose to 42 on Sunday as emergency teams raced to fix water supplies and roads devastated by the storm. 29 of the dead were in eastern India's Odisha state and 13 in Bangladesh. Officials in the two countries said a fraction of the casualty numbers seen in past cyclones. Cyclone Fani barreled into Odisha on Friday, packing winds up to 200 kilometers an hour before losing intensity as it headed towards Bangladesh. The chief minister said Fani was the first summer cyclone to hit India's Bay of Bengal coast in 43 years and only the third in the past 150 years. Normally, the storm hits around October and November. India has earned praise from the UN and other experts of the speedy evacuation of 1.2 million people in the powerful storm's path and minimizing the loss of life.
And the news continues here on Eagle News International. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Health is our most important.
Welcome back. This just in, Meghan Markle has gone into labor as royal fans desperately await news of her first child with Prince Harry. It's understood that she went into labor first thing in the morning local time. The child, which will be seventh in line for the throne, was due in late April or early May. The couple had previously announced that their newborn would not be making his or her public appearance on its first day in the world, and that is a step away from royal tradition. Meanwhile, Bicoy, the hooded figure in a series of videos linking President Duterte's family to illegal drug activities, surfaced at the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, or IBP office in Ortigas today. They said he was seeking legal assistance. In a video, he said, "I am Bicoy. I am a real person and not a figment of imagination like what other people are saying," according to Peter Jomel Advincula, who appeared in the Ang Totoong Narcoles videos. Advincula also said, "I need a lawyer to whom I can submit my sworn affidavit and help me file a case against members of the syndicate." IBP National President Abdiel Fajardo said that Advincula appeared at the IBP office just like any other client seeking legal advice. Advincula was accompanied by nuns when he arrived at the IBP. Fajardo also said the IBP has yet to determine whether it would take on Advincula's case.
Thailand's newly crowned King Maha Vajiralongkorn is carried by soldiers on a gilded palanquin through the streets of Bangkok in front of crowds who gathered to witness the historic day. The King Rama X of the Chakri dynasty wore a bejeweled robe and broad-brimmed hat with a feather on the second of the 3 days of pageantry and royal splendor. The 7-kilometer procession brings the public into close proximity with the 66-year-old monarch, who for the first time 2 years after he ascended the throne in an increasingly assertive reign. A 3-day coronation, which started Saturday, is the first since Vajiralongkorn's adored and revered father was crowned in 1950.
Four people were killed in Israel and 19 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Palestinian and Israeli authorities said during the most serious escalation since the 2014 war. Israel carried out a series of strikes in response to rocket barrages fired from the Hamas-run territory. In total, 19 Palestinians were killed by Israeli strikes in Gaza on Sunday, according to the enclave's health ministry. The ministry also said among those killed were a pregnant woman and a 4-month-old baby. The Israeli military declined to comment on the claim. At least 9 of those killed were confirmed to be militants affiliated with the Palestinian territories leaders Hamas or the allied Islamic Jihad group. On the Israeli side, 4 civilians were killed as Hamas and Islamic Jihad fired barrages of rockets and at least 1 anti-tank missile from the enclave, according to Israeli authorities. 3 of the dead were identified by authorities as Israeli citizens, with the nationality of the 4th not announced. Israeli targets included internal security headquarters in the Palestinian enclave, according to an Interior Ministry statement. The building in Gaza City was destroyed, the statement said. Rocket fire and Israeli strikes continued until Sunday evening. Meanwhile, President Trump assured Israel on Sunday that it has Washington's full support after the Jewish state led waves of retaliatory strikes in the Gaza Strip in response to Palestinian rockets. He said once again Israel faces a barrage of deadly rocket attacks by terrorist groups, Hamas and Islamic Jihad. We support Israel 100% in its defense of its citizens. To the Gazan people, these terrorist acts against Israel will bring you nothing but more misery. End the violence and work towards peace. It can happen.
After firing hundreds of rockets into Israel, the militant group appears to be offering the chance of a ceasefire. Palestinian leaders in Gaza agreed a ceasefire with Israel on Monday to end a deadly two-day escalation in violence that threatened to widen into war, officials with knowledge of the deal said. Egypt brokered the agreement to cease hostilities from 4:30 a.m. An official from the Strip's Islamist rulers Hamas and another from its allied group Islamic Jihad said, on condition of anonymity. The Islamic Jihad official said the new truce agreement was again based on Israel easing its blockade. Among the steps, he said, were the relaxing of limits on fishing and improvements in Gaza's electricity and fuel situation. Israeli officials have not confirmed whether a truce has been reached, but the military said the protective restrictions in place on residents of southern Israel since the fighting began were being lifted. Israel and Palestinian militants in Gaza have fought 3 wars since 2008, and the escalation brought them to the brink of another.
Meanwhile, the United States is sending an aircraft carrier strike group and a bomber task force to the Middle East in a clear and unmistakable message to Iran, according to National Security Advisor John Bolton. Bolton said in a statement, and I quote, "In response to a number of troubling and escalatory indications and warnings, the United States is deploying the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group and a bomber task force to the U.S. Central Command region." He said the deployment is aimed at sending a clear and unmistakable message to the Iranian regime that any attack on the United States interests or on those of our allies will be met with unrelenting force. This also comes during a deadly escalation between Gaza-based Palestinian militants and Israel, in which the two sides have traded a barrage of rocket fire and airstrikes in recent days. The deployment also comes amid heightened tensions between Washington and Tehran over the latter's nuclear program, with the U.S. taking aim at Iranian-enriched uranium exports with sanctions.
North Korea state media said that leader Kim Jong-un had overseen a rocket and tactical guided weapons test after the drill Saturday had raised concerns Pyongyang was escalating provocations with the U.S. nuclear negotiations deadlocked. A return to missile launches would be likely to infuriate U.S. President Donald Trump, but the North's official KCNA news agency shied away from the term in its report, saying Kim had ordered a strike drill involving long-range multiple rocket launchers, which are not targeted by UN sanctions resolutions and unspecified tactical guided weapons. Seoul's military described the weapons as projectiles after it detected Saturday's firing. The United States and North Korea have been in loggerheads since the collapse of a Trump-Kim summit in February, when the two sides clashed over sanctions and the extent of Pyongyang's concessions on its atomic arsenal. But despite the latest saber rattling from Pyongyang, Trump insisted that a breakthrough was possible. Kim Jong-un fully realizes the great economic potential of North Korea, will do nothing to interfere or end it, Trump tweeted. He also knows that I am with him, does not want to break his promise to me, a deal will happen. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that the U.S. still sees a path forward in its nuclear talks with North Korea, even after Pyongyang's latest round of test launches.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo pressed for Russia to get out of Venezuela, while his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov called on Washington to abandon its irresponsible plans in the crisis-racked country. Pompeo has said Maduro had been ready to flee to Havana, but the Russians who had flown military advisors to Caracas to shore up his socialist government talked him out of it. He said the Russians must get out. Pompeo told ABC televisions this week, "I'm going to meet with Foreign Minister Lavrov in recent days. It's very clear we want the Russians out, we want the Iranians out, we want the Cubans out. It's very clear." Meanwhile, Russia on Sunday urged U.S. officials to abandon their irresponsible plans on Venezuela. Let's listen in.
Мы призываем и американцев, и всех, кто их поддерживает, отказаться от безответственных планов и действовать исключительно в рамках международного права.
Russia, a major creditor to oil-rich Venezuela, has boosted its own support to Maduro, sending dozens of troops to Caracas and dismissing Juan Guaido's claim to legitimacy. President Trump has repeatedly warned that all options were on the table regarding Venezuela, including the implicit threat of U.S. military intervention. Thus far, however, there has been no American mobilization beyond the dispatch of aid that Maduro's forces blocked on the Colombian border in February. An attempt by Guaido to rally Venezuelan troops to his side on Tuesday fell flat, with Army top brass publicly standing with Maduro and declaring their loyalty.
The Dutch territory of Curaçao said Saturday it would do what was needed to prevent measles spreading from a Scientology cruise ship after a crew member came down with the disease. The free winds, which left the Caribbean island of Saint Lucia on Friday, arrived back in its home port of Curaçao Saturday. There were about 300 people aboard the ship, according to Saint Lucia authorities. The Curaçao government said it would take all necessary precautions to handle the case of measles on board. The vessel is moored in an area not accessible to the public.
We don't have an outbreak of measles in Curaçao. There is no outbreak as such of measles on the boat. There's nobody in the boat that did anything wrong. Somebody came from Europe and after a couple of days had the sniffles and was isolated and turned out to have measles, and we're trying to contain, because if you allow people to go off the ship and into a plane, and maybe they're communicable, they're infectious when they're on the plane, then of course you run a risk of exporting the disease all over the place. So our obligation is to try to limit the spread of the disease as much as possible.
Church officials have not returned calls for comment. According to the church's website, the ship is the home of a religious retreat ministering the most advanced level of spiritual counseling. It says religious conventions and seminars also are held aboard.
All right. An unknown person threatened to bring menace in a shopping center in Finland, and we have a report from Christina Kinenen.
On April 30, 2019, an unknown person threatened to bring menace to a shopping mall in the city of Espoo. The said threat was posted on Tor. Police were aware about the threat and were on alert. According to Iltalehti, one of the largest newspapers in Finland, the police has in custody a young man that allegedly posted the threat. Residents nearby have shown their concern and sent their message regarding the issue. Roel Regualo said,
I think that is a great thing that the suspect has been apprehended by now, but I think we should always be aware of what is happening in our surroundings and be vigilant at all times.
Melanie Stromberg, who recently visited Iso-Omena shopping center, stated her feelings via WhatsApp. She said, and quote, "Even though there is a threat, I did not feel nervous. I felt safe, but you can count the people who were there. Very less. It's not crowded as usual." It is business as usual in Iso-Omena, but the threat affected the numbers of shoppers in the mall. The said shopping mall is not closed for the public, but the police presence will be felt all throughout the shopping malls in Espoo City. This is Christina Sumawang-Kinon reporting from Finland for Eagle News.
Days after a restaurant at the luxury hotel Cinnamon Grand was bombed in Colombo, it reopens its gates to guests with multiple layers of security checks in place. Recently reopened, barely 10 of its 500 luxury rooms are occupied, down from the 300 usual at this time of year, as fears rise over the impact of the bombings on the island nation's burgeoning tourism industry. On April 21, the Cinnamon was one of 3 hotels hit by jihadi bombers, along with 3 churches in attacks claimed by the Islamic State group that left 257 people dead.
This hotel was always referred to as the King's Cross railway station. It was so always busy. The lobby is buzzing with people of all race, nationalities, and for people visiting here for all purpose. It could be wedding, it could be dining, it could be just to be seen and have a cup of coffee, or you're staying, you're working. It was the King's Cross station of Sri Lanka. But now, but we'll get back. We'll get back to the old glory soon.
Many countries have advised their nationals to avoid Sri Lanka since the attacks shattered its image as a safe holiday destination 10 years after the end of a brutal civil war.
The security forces have to first give us the clearance that Sri Lanka is safe, and the risk of terrorism is 0 or minimal. Then the government and the foreign ministries and the embassies have to do their part in informing the world that Sri Lanka is safe, and in trying to lift the the travel bans to be lifted.
And you saw the fear of people. So whenever somebody walked around with a bag and a bit of a shoveled look, then I think a lot of people might be a terrorist. I'm becoming paranoid sometimes a bit myself, but I think it's becoming a bit less. I really hope that especially the people from this lovely hotel, that they get some business at some point. I think it will have a major hit.
We'll be back with more news when Eagle News International returns.
Their most important asset, and it should always
alas 4 hanggang alas 5 ng hapon.
Welcome back. President Trump sent Asian and European markets plunging after threatening to hike tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods at the end of the week in a bid to speed up stuttering trade talks between the economic superpowers. Shanghai plunged more than 5% with the Chinese yuan also taking a battering after the president threw a spanner into the high-level negotiations, which many observers were expecting to wrap up imminently. Hong Kong tumbled 2.9%, Singapore was off 3.1%, and Taipei shed 1.8%, while Sydney dropped 0.8% and Wellington was 1% down. Mumbai, Manila, and Jakarta were also sharply lower. Tokyo and Seoul were closed for the holidays. In early trade, Paris dived 2%, and Frankfurt shed 1.7%.
The pilot of a Russian passenger plane that erupted in a ball of fire on the runway of Moscow's busiest airport, killing 41 people, said lightning led to the emergency landing. Investigators were on Monday working to understand the cause or the causes of the blaze after the Sukhoi Superjet 100 had to return to Sheremetyevo Airport shortly after takeoff Sunday evening. The pilot, Denis Yevdokimov, told the Russian media the craft lost communication and needed to switch to emergency control mode because of lightning on the Aeroflot flight to the Arctic city of Murmansk. He did not specify if the plane was struck directly. We managed to restore communication through the emergency frequency on our radio connection, but the link was only for a short time and kept cutting out. It was possible to say only a few words, he told the Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper. Videos on social media showed a plane crash landing and then speeding along the runway with flames pouring from its fuselage.
In other news, a judge ruled that ride-hailing company Lyft must abide by a new rule in New York, guaranteeing the equivalent of a minimum wage to drivers. The company, which made its NASDAQ debut in March, has been fighting since January to block a city regulation starting in February, requiring ride-sharing drivers to make at least $17.22 per hour, a first in the United States. Now, Lyft insists that paying such a salary, which is based on a formula using a so-called utilization rate, meant to prevent drivers from spending too much time sitting in empty cars, would give its competitor Uber an unfair advantage because they might be able to pay drivers less based on a higher utilization rate. But New York Judge Andrea Masley dismissed the concerns, arguing that the city's regulator, the Taxi and Limousine Commission, or TLC, had already revised its calculation method based on Lyft's concerns and promised to review its effects no less than annually. Democratic bastion New York City, the world's biggest market for ride-hailing mobile platforms, in 2018 set a minimum wage for such drivers over the objections of companies like Uber, Lyft, and Juno. An hourly minimum wage of $17.22 should guarantee drivers the equivalent of the state of New York's $15 minimum wage after costs. It could translate into an annual average earnings increase of $9,600 per driver, according to estimates. And Eagle News International will be back after this short break.
It's the most important asset, and it's
one of the most famous landmarks here in Stavanger, Norway. And if you want to see more of the tourist spots like this, just tune into Digital Nest every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 p.m. I am Managing Mihia from Stavanger, Norway. Always fun with 25.
Ako po si Lilet. Lagi po kayong manood ng Young Once Upon a Time, Season 3, tuwing linggo, alas 8 ng gabi, dito lang sa Net 25.
Landmarks, linggo, alas 6 hanggang alas 7 ng gabi.
Humanity is rapidly destroying the natural world upon which our prosperity and ultimately our survival depends, according to a landmark UN assessment of the state of nature released Monday. Changes wrought by decades of pillaging and poisoning forests, oceans, soil, and air threaten society at least as much as climate change, said Robert Watson, who chaired the 132-nation meeting that validated a summary for policymakers forged by 450 experts. 1 million animal and plant species face extinction, many within decades, they reported. Alarmingly, the accelerating pace of which unique life forms are disappearing, already tens of hundreds of times faster than during the last 10 million years, could tip Earth into the first mass extinction since non-avian dinosaurs died out 66 million years ago. In the short term, humans are not at risk, said Joseph Satil, a professor at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research in Germany and co-chair of the UN Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. In the longer term, it is hard to say, he says, if humans do go extinct, nature will find its way. It always does. Drawing from 15,000 sources and an underlying 1,800-page report, the executive summary details how our species' growing footprint and appetites have compromised the natural renewal of resources that sustain civilization, starting with fresh water, breathable air, and productive soil.
In NBA action, Jamal Murray scored 34 points, including 6 clutch free throws down the stretch to lift the Denver Nuggets to a gritty 116-112 NBA playoff win over the Portland Trail Blazers. The 22-year-old Canadian Murray combined with Serbian Nikola Jokic to form a dynamic scoring duo as the Nuggets square their second-round Western Conference series at 2 games each. It was a quick turnaround from the Trail Blazers' 140-137 quadruple overtime victory in Friday's Game 3. Game 4 didn't last nearly as long as that 3-hour, 35-minute marathon, but it was another back-and-forth battle highlighted by Murray's precision shooting and a fourth playoff triple-double from Jokic. Jokic had 21 points, 12 rebounds, and 11 assists for his second straight triple-double. And Murray, who led all scores, was a perfect 11 for 11 for the free throw line for Denver, who handed Portland their first playoff loss at home this season. 2 free throws by Murray increased the Nuggets' edge to 112-108 with 13 seconds on the clock. After Damian Lillard scored on a layup with 7.7 seconds remaining, Murray hit a pair of free throws to make it 114-110 with 6.7 seconds to play. CJ McCollum scored on a long 2-point shot to cut it to 114-112 with 4.4 seconds to go, but Murray clinched it with another pair at the line with 3.4 seconds left.
The second ever Euro-Filipino football festival, called the Schumann Cup, was organized by the EU delegation to the Philippines with the support of the German embassy on the 4th of May 2019 at the Alabang Country Club. The objective of this event is to provide opportunity for 200 Filipino children from 5 football groups to experience football through a football clinic to be led by Mr. Neko Lambi. Mr. Lambi, the head of the Caribbean Football Club, is a highly experienced professional soccer coach from the Caribbean nation of Belize, who has been coaching boys and girls aged between 5 and 15 and above in the best international schools in Southeast Asia for over 15 years. The EU delegation to the Philippines is staging this football event to foster solidarity and friendship between the EU and the Philippines in the area of sports. Football is gaining popularity in the Philippines and has its origins in England. The famous Football League was in fact founded also in England, becoming the first of many professional competitions. EU Ambassador Franz Jessen said he would like to give the opportunity to some young Filipinos to experience the dynamism of football. The following football clubs will be participating in this event: Gawad Kalinga, Dream Big Philippines, Ceres Alabang, Punta Fuego Football Club, and Tali FC. Furthermore, some European diplomats from the EU delegation will pitch their skills against Globe. Mr. Thomas Wiersing, deputy head of delegation, tossed the coin and the ceremonial kickoff during the friendly match.
And finally, in our news, our EBC correspondent Irene Juliet Arzadon takes us on a trip to the fairy tale-like place of Schlossberg. Irene?
What is the first thing that comes into your mind when you're thinking about a Middle Age? Is it the knights, kings, or a huge castle?
Hello everyone, I'm Irene Juliet Arzadon. Today I'm taking you on a time journey back into the Middle Ages.
Right now we are here at the castle called Schlossburg in Solingen, where its first Middle Age entertainment and street food festival takes place. One option to arrive at the castle is the cable car. It connects the castle on the hill with its valley since its opening in 1952. This cable car is also the first one in North Rhine-Westphalia, which was designed to transport people.
Schlossburg is one of the largest castles in the western part of Germany, which was built in the 12th century. The castle attracts about 170,000 visitors in the year.
The Middle Age Entertainment and Food Festival allows you to take a look at the medieval cuisine.
These delicious dishes are available for only €3.
While you enjoy your food, medieval music adds an authentic touch to your culinary experience.
Here you can expect a great scenery for the eyes, sounds from the past, and food from the Middle Ages, which makes the whole trip for the family unique. From EBC Dortmund, Germany, I'm Irene Juliet Arzadon, and I'm 1 with 25.
Thank you, Irene.
Thanks, Irene. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards on Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. I'm Sam Cepeda. Thanks for joining us.
And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles and
We're one with 25.